If you believe, like a lot of us out there, that the dollar's falling apart because this government has overspent something crazy and leveraged itself, and you have no faith in the stock market, and you don't even believe in cryptocurrencies, well, who would? What should you invest your money in? Gold, of course. Gold's been around for thousands of years. It's always been the original currency out there, but you don't want to keep it in your bathtub or your backyard. So what can you do? Call Genesis Gold Group and set up a gold-backed IRA. The dollar could collapse, the stock market may go nowhere, but gold has never gone to zero. Call Genesis Gold Group right now to learn about rolling over your stock-based IRA into a gold-backed IRA, and they'll give you $10,000 of free silver if you qualify. So right now, call 800-594-9698. That's 800-594-9698. 9698. And folks, it's Tuesday. We're happy to be back in studio. We've got a very special guest, a Schaftlein Report veteran coming from Liberty University. Dave Brat, welcome back to the show. Happy to have you with us on a very appropriate day, I might add.
Great to be on, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, Dave, the stock market has been going up and up and up. 7 companies, they call them the Magnificent Seven, seem to be leading the rally. It broadened out a little bit last week. You and I have talked about the monetization before. Can you share with our audience, what is happening in the economy right now, and then give them a little idea about where we're going? Because as we've discussed, that Fed balance sheet is still extremely inflated.
Yeah, it's as an economist, it's very confusing, right? The link between the real economy, which is just basically a carcass right now, right? The things that cause GDP growth, productivity's down for the past 40 years. GDP growth is at 1%. Capital investment, human capital, technological growth, patent activity, none of them are hot, and yet the market goes up. Well, why is that? Well, the market faded right back with the Silicon Bank and the credit crisis that was ensuing right there, and the liquidity crisis that was being written about. And that is partly because the Fed was shaving down its balance sheet from $9 trillion to $8.5 trillion. The day after Silicon Bank gets jittery and a couple others get jittery, the Fed immediately adds $500 billion again. $500 billion to their balance sheet. So that's stimulative. And then the Republicans, who are the true fiscal conservatives in this country, just settled on $50 trillion in debt over the next 10 years, right? So what the Republicans believe in right now, I have no idea. We had Russ Vogt in D.C. Running a major group. He was the head of OMB. He put proposals forward to shave $17 trillion off of the $50 trillion we're leaving to our kids. We're currently $32 trillion, right?
Right.
So it would have been way over the status quo with all the problems that has. But at least shaving 17 off 50 in the 10-year window. Then the Freedom Caucus said, well, that's going to be tough sledding, so we'll go for $4 trillion off the 50. And we passed a bill. This was shocking. I used to be in Congress, right? To get the conference, the Republican conference, to cut money and vote on it, 220 of them. And they voted overwhelmingly to cut $4 trillion. Then Speaker McCarthy somehow goes up to the White House and waves a giant white flag and gives up no cuts. And so we just added $4 trillion minimum over the next 2 years, and $2 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see. And of course, that's stimulative.
Yeah.
And so, no sane economist could have forecasted that. All of the projected deficits were, okay, we have COVID, emergency economy, $2 trillion deficits to save the country. You just shut down the whole country, right? You got to give some checks out to consumers so you can live. And businesses, okay, I don't agree with all the COVID nonsense, but okay. But then certainly after COVID and the emergency ends and you're not giving checks to everyone in the country, you're not going to still spend $2 trillion a year extra, right?
So the
budget
think.
was $5 trillion and it went to $7 trillion. And nope, we just locked in, the Republicans just locked in. We had leverage like we've never had, like I've ever seen. We had absolute leverage to get what we wanted. And the big spenders on both sides just totally gave it up and went along with the White House budget. And so that's, why is the stock market up? Because it's living on artificial government spending and Fed money.
And you have companies like Apple, which is approaching $3 trillion. It's never happened before, trading at a price earnings multiple of 31. You have Nvidia, the poster child of artificial intelligence, trading at something like 156 times cash flow when it traditionally trades at maybe 15 to 20 times cash flow. I mean, Dave, these are astounding numbers. The only thing I can recall, it reminds me of what happened back in 1999-ish, around that period of time. And at the same time, the Fed was inflating. But when you take where the Federal Reserve has been and where they are now, as you mentioned, 2 consecutive years of $2 trillion deficits get you from $4 trillion to $8 trillion, throwing another $1.5 trillion, which you referenced. Look, I looked at that balance sheet this morning. It's still $8.4 trillion. Even after coming down $300 billion, I'm sitting there saying they're talking about quantitative tightening. That is like, folks, again, these numbers are so gigantic.
Right.
That we're trying to put it in context for you. But when you still have $8.4 trillion on your balance sheet, and Dave, a lot of those, quote, notes and bonds that were purchased, they weren't purchased at the current interest rates. They were purchased at much lower rates. So imagine if the Federal Reserve was a bank. You mentioned Silicon Valley Bank and what happened there. Folks, if the Federal Reserve was a bank, it would not be in business. But because they have because they have unlimited ability to print money, they are. Dave, do you really believe the Fed is going to go through with quantitative tightening, actually reducing that balance sheet as we come across the rest of the year when, quote, the soft landing is supposed to hit?
I do. Everybody on Wall Street, a year ago was saying, we'd be down to 0 interest rates by now and it'll all be over and the Fed's going to loosen and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think so. And they, if you do the rough math, in 10 years, we're at 50 trillion in debt. And if you take 5% current interest rate on 50 trillion, that's $2.5 trillion just in interest payments. So that cannot stand. Right back when I was in Congress, the budget was 4 to 5 trillion. So that interest on the debt would be half your budget if you lived in normal, sane times. That 2.5 trillion in interest payments is also 3 times the current defense budget. And so they cannot live with that. The left can't live with that, right? That's what's interesting. The interest is going to crowd out communism. Maybe it's a good thing, right? So that's a little joke. But also you brought up the big firms. Of course, they're not big firms. Those are big monopolies.
Right.
And that's a whole nother problem, right? I looked at the patent data lately. And turns out 1% of our firms are cranking out 50% of our patents. China's patents are going through the roof. Ours have leveled out. The patents are a good, proxy for innovation, research and development, economic growth. And so that's not good news. And so, so the big firms are growing like crazy. That's because they've eaten up the patents from all the small firms. They're doing all the innovation, and the distribution of income is just increasing like crazy. The rich are getting incredibly rich, and the rest of America, right, who doesn't own any equities, 80% of the people are not on that ride.
Right.
And so that's going to come due too. It doesn't take a genius, right? When you got Trump and RFK Jr. Both running on populist tickets, and even DeSantis also, something new is happening in the country. And now you got these Cotton and these 4 U.S. senators working on on labor bargaining power on the Republican side. And so, whoa, something's going on, and that could be a good thing. I'm dying to see the details on that, but paying attention to the average working American, and all those issues are just working together to create a catastrophe coming up, right? We all know it's coming.
Well,
As soon as this market cracks up, it's going to be a disaster.
Normally, when you mention Tom Cotton, virtually everything that man gets tied to is something good comes of it. So, I mean, he is a rock solid good conservative. Yep. So I would, if he's involved, that gives me, frankly, a lot.
Oh yeah, no, four good guys. Him and J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
And he's rock solid. Yale smart guy. And then Florida, Rubio, and I can't remember the fourth, but the fourth they're all they're guys I trust intuitively,
right?
And they're coming up with a new cookbook for renewing America's economy. So we'll see what that looks like.
Well, something's got to give here, because you mentioned you mentioned the wealth effect, and I see that happening across our country. Look, the average American, median, not average, because median folks is defined by half make more, half make less.
Right.
Average is skewed. So the median income in the United States is $62,000. Dave, I was doing some research for the show. Meta, formerly Facebook, the median is $300,000. Google, the median's $280,000. I mean, folks, you've heard about in the media, well, there's been a lot of layoffs in Silicon Valley. Let me tell you something. If that's the median pay, half make more and half make less, holy moly. I mean,
wow.
That's a gigantic figure, folks. And Dave, let me press you on this too. And no pun intended, but the Federal Reserve is now saying the inflation rate's running 4%. Statistically, that may be factually correct. But Dave, I know this from stuff I buy, from other people, it sure doesn't seem like it. I mean, it seems like things are elevated and they're staying elevated. And when I hear this, well, the rent equivalency is coming down and used car price, and I'm like, wait a minute, has anybody ever gone to the grocery store and anything other than eggs is still very expensive?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the trust in the federal government is everyone's questioning, right? The unemployment numbers similarly, right? There's a $3 million job gap that is supposed to be explained by these two surveys that have wildly different outcomes.
Right.
One constructed by the government, the other not as much. And so inflation, it's also, kind of humorous. The Fed wants to only cover the core. That's the one they follow until the other one's lower. So now the headline's lower at 4 something, but the core, the one they say they track, is higher. And so you just get a kick out of watching the press cover which numbers. But I don't really buy it yet. The Fed, that's why I think the Fed's still got some tightening to do. The best economic reports I've reported on Brat economics on Getter. All I do is report on charts there. I just put charts up and comment a paragraph on the charts. But the best economic studies on inflation cross countries, 100 countries over 100 years. And Larry Summers agrees with me, right? Head of Harvard and a big economic brain. I had the same commentary, but the research shows once you crack 8 or 9% inflation, you're going to have 5% inflation for about 5 years.
I think that's
barring some horrendous recession, right?
Right.
In which case, prices go down. And so, that's my gut feel. I trust the long run evidence across countries, across time. But as we both said at the beginning of the show, you've never seen stimulus like this, right? This is just stimulus on steroids. So it's hard to make rational forecasts when your government is so irrational.
Well, we talked a little bit about this before the show. Let's tie the United States in with China a little bit because, folks, despite everything you hear about, Blinken's meeting with Xi, he had the meeting and the United States and China are at loggerheads, believe me, the economic interest of these two countries are so tied in. When people talk, the United States is going to have a war with China. Normally, you would have a war with a country over economic issues when something's going the wrong way. Dave, again, our economies are very intertwined. Talk a little bit. Look, and folks, the concern out there right now is that China may be slowing. They're not growing as fast as they were coming out of COVID. They went through in the last year what we went through in 2020 and 21. So they're not coming out of it as quick. Dave, China's actually talking about cutting interest rates while, and I'm in your camp, the Fed still has some work to do on our side. But Dave, with China slowing, that is likely going to slow demand for some commodities, oil included. And despite the fact that the Saudis are cutting production. If that demand from China slows any amount at all, oil prices could come down.
Yep.
Dave, talk a little bit about the capital side of it that we talked about pre-show, because folks, this is a startling statistic Dave's going to share it with you.
Yeah, well, I think what you just said is true. And I looked at I read a couple articles on those stimulative measures in China, and they're not that big in magnitude. It's a couple $100 billion, and we're in the trillions over here. So that I don't think that's a major story. So it'll be what you just said, I think, is accurate. And then, I track the real economy, not the financialization. The stock markets get all the buzz. People got to start paying attention to the underlying economy, right? Your kids' education, capital stocks, technological growth, human capital, et cetera. Those are the things that make real GDP growth, right? Cars and refrigerators and services. Mm-hmm. And so I looked up the capital spending and investment. If you invest in capital, right, you invest in robots and hammers and tools and shovels and farm tractors, and that's capital investment. And if you add up all that investment over the last 50 years, you get the capital stock, the total amount of capital that your country has to work with. Well, it turns out China now, their capital stock's going up to the moon like a rocket ship, and their capital stock's $99 trillion. The United States, by contrast, which still has a bigger economy, we're leveling off. Our capital stock is not going like a rocket up to the moon. And our capital stock is less than China. Ours is 70 trillion. Theirs is 99 trillion. And to make matters worse, of course, investment in the last 10 years, it's fresher, right? It's new, innovative capital with all the latest technology and, brain power built into it. China over the last 10 years has grown 150%. Their capital stock has grown 150% over the last 10 years. The United States capital stock has only grown 15% over the last 10 years. And I just posted those a couple of days out at Brat Economics on Getter. And that's Fred, right? That's Federal Reserve data. So it's not, some conservative, the left just makes stuff up. They say conservatives are making, it's like, no, this is Federal Reserve data. It's like, we're not making stuff up. This is, sorry, it's not good.
Go to federalreserve.org. All the information's right there.
There you go.
No, it's not hard to see that. I mean, look, here's where I have a big concern. Okay, so we're sitting here with 5% interest rates right now in the Fed funds rate, and I'm in your camp. I mean, to really defeat inflation, you have to get ahead of the curve. I had no problem with the Fed halting for 30, 45 days. Their next meeting's at the end of July. But Dave, if the data continues coming in where we're at that, let's call it 4 to 5% range, I don't think they have any choice, but they're going to have to raise rates again. And where I think there's going to be a pressure point here, and why I mentioned, will we hit a soft landing? For all the critique that you and I have given the Federal Reserve, and a lot of it rightfully earned, the fact is, since they started these interest rate hikes, inflation has cooled. Yeah. The balance sheet has just come down minimally, though. So I wonder if they have the fortitude to continue tightening the interest rates, bringing down that balance sheet if we have a situation where unemployment ticks up 4.25%, 4.5%. Because as you and I know, Dave, it's tough in parentheses to have a recession when you have 3.7 unemployment and you're creating, albeit 280,000 jobs a month. I haven't seen many in the history books of that happening.
Yeah, no, I mean, their hands are tied. They cannot win. No matter what they do, they lose. And I couldn't think of a more deserving group. In my opinion, and a fairly intelligent guy named John Taylor at Stanford out there on your left coast, he followed Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman says inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. So scratch all the other headlines. The Fed goofed us up back in 04, 05. According to John Taylor, I got into it. I didn't agree with him. 20 years ago or whenever, I met him at an economic conference. I said, yeah, but there's all this crookedness in the housing market and the regulators and the banking is terrible. He said, nah, he says, it's too much money. If you wouldn't have printed the money, it wouldn't have gone to real estate, right? All that money was sloshing around, had to go somewhere. So, okay, all the things you said are true, but if you wouldn't have printed the money, it couldn't have happened. And I was like, well, got a point. So he made a convert out of me, and I kept studying. But go read on that. And then after they brought the economy to its knees in the 0708 financial crisis, and no one went to jail, none of the crooks went to jail.
Right.
And at a minimum, you'd say, well, the Federal Reserve, man, they're never going to do that again. That's the one good thing we got out of this, right? The Fed would never just, print money and mess around with the central price in the economy, which is called the interest rate. So then they keep the interest rate at zero for a decade. What could go wrong, right?
Exactly.
So you got an everything bubble baked in the cake now, and they messed up our economy for 2 decades. And my guess is I hate to be pessimistic, but I think once that thing pops, we're going to be in for a lost decade in terms of productivity growth. And once the fundamentals kick in, kind of like Japan. And I'm not optimistic.
We saw what happened in housing back in 07, 08, and 09. Let's fast forward to today. And again, it's been talked about, but this commercial real estate bubble look, folks, if you're in San Francisco, and this isn't just my opinion, I'm talking to investment bankers all across the country. I mean, when you take people that don't even want to be in the city, it's lost almost 10% of its population. You don't even go to jail when you steal $900. Cars are getting broken into. People get mugged. People get killed. I mean, that is not a conducive environment, Dave Brat, to, having a thriving commercial real estate market. And a lot of these banks gave a lot of these loans at the height of the market. And it's not just San Francisco. They're the poster child. New York, it's bad. You pick any blue city. This problem exists, and it's a combination of lending at the height, socioeconomic problems, COVID, and the combination of people not coming back to work. Dave, they've been saying for about a year that this is going to be a big issue. Is it, or is it more hyperbole? How big is this commercial real estate problem in your eyes?
You know better than I do. I mean, it would have been a bigger problem if we wouldn't have just stimulated again. Yeah. I got friends in commercial real estate out in San Fran and LA, a couple, I ask them and they say, no, it's bad. It's in a year or so, everything's 5-year debt on commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. And so like you said before, right, we're locked in that lower rates a couple years ago. But in a year or two, most of them come in. And so that's when we'll see reality, right? And then you mentioned all the social conditions. Yeah. And it's funny, the left always talks about sustainability. But any term you ever hear like that, I mean, just say the opposite. Right. It's just Orwellian. Yeah. The idea that these cities are sustainable. And now the energy policy, it turns out, even Toyota with a DA is talking about Toyota. And he's doing back of the envelope calculations on energy. And then it doesn't take Einstein when you say that, solar works, 25% of the time, continuous energy, and wind works 30% of the time. And you've tied your economy to that. I mean, holy moly, that is not sustainable. I could go on and on and on. The education of the kids, the values, the ethics, Dodger Stadium, these things are just not sustainable.
No, every day you wake up and it's what the hell are they talking about now? I mean,
I don't know.
And I'm going to tie it back to what you said. This administration makes the Barack Obama administration look like conservatives.
Right. No, that's correct. Right.
I mean, because you were around Congress at that.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, these are not your father's Democrats who are running things right now. They're really not. I mean, it's just when you see a government that's hostile to energy companies. I mean, look, all these high-tech companies, when they make these gigantic profits, you don't hear anybody on the left complain. But by God, ExxonMobil or Chevron comes out and they have record. Well, someone needs to investigate this stuff. I mean, Dave, the double standard. I mean, it just drives me crazy. So here's the big question: political leadership in the country right now. Yep. I mean, looking at Joe Biden, and again, he's our president, but I mean, the confidence level when you're looking at a man whoever's calling the shots in the White House, anti-energy, anti-this, the stuff that they're for, it makes you pull your hair out, and the stuff they're against, you're saying, what the hell's wrong with these people? This is what a country should be doing. I mean,
Yep.
it's a tough time, particularly for conservatives right now.
Yeah, well, just we lack a backbone in messaging. I mean, if you can't win a messaging war right now on 50 trillion in debt and invasion of the border, China policy run amok, I mean, it's just low hanging fruit, right? What the kids in the public schools and all this kind of thing. Just it's stunning when you look at the CCP, right? The Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping gave a talk a few months ago. It was their 20th Central Party Committee meeting. And he said, we're making three basic moves. And, you just got to go back to your Karl Marx here seriously, right? Because that's what they are, right? So he said, number one, we're going to be full on Marxist-Leninist. Number two, we're getting rid of all market reforms. That means no more market stuff, right? Deng Xiaoping and some of those guys used markets and they got rich. So he's telling you straight up, we're not interested in growth anymore, right? By him saying that, right? Whoa, boy, that's a. Yeah. And then third, we're getting rid of all the China stuff in China. We're getting rid of peace and harmony lingo, and we're going to Marxist-Leninist war footing. And so when you hear the superpower there, and the globalist guys agree with that, and the Marxists, for those who don't know, right? The Marxists and it were, there's no God, there's no ethics. There's going to be class war. They never tell you who's going to run the shop when you're done with this class war, but it's them, and they've been totalitarian at every turn. And so, you don't need to be a scholar to figure out when you see the country under attack, capitalism under attack, values under attack, the family under attack. Hey, some other philosophy is guiding that. Well, right? And so you got to make up your mind on that, American people. What is that?
Well, you give me a perfect segue into one of my final topics I wanted to talk to you about. Let's talk about politics a little bit, because you and I are involved in that. Okay. Yep. Look, I've seen polling, Dave, that shows Donald Trump over Joe Biden by 4 to 6 points. I've seen polling that shows Biden defeats Trump by the same amount. I've seen some. These are credible, folks. This isn't some outlier like. Nope. Rasmussen reports, Quinnipiac. Yep. I mean, these are credible polling companies. I see them, Biden, Trump plus or minus a point, DeSantis plus or minus a point with Biden. So, Dave, if you're a leftist, you're thinking, how in the world, with all this stuff that we're doing right, can a guy like Trump be anywhere near Biden? And if you're on our side, you're going, how can half the country want to follow a guy who has a hard time staying awake in front of a camera? Yeah. I mean, we've seen divided government, Dave, but this is really taking it to a new level. And then you throw in the potential of a no labels third party, where the great sucking sound of 60% of the voters that are in that middle. Dave, handicap it for me here. And how do you see things right now? Because you've been part of. You've been in the game, and you've seen it from for the last couple decades.
Yeah, well, the one interesting thing, right, in terms of the last few days, just a little snapshot, is at that Dodger Stadium thing. I heard credible reporting that 70 to 80% of the participants were Hispanic males coming out in favor of the family and the Catholic Church, et cetera. So, I mean, that, if that's a headwind, that's very interesting. And that's why J.D. Vance and Cotton and all these guys, they're seeing something happening that's fundamentally different, right? And so when you see an attack on the American institutions that matter, that is likely going to be the issue, right? I don't know how that gets quite framed yet, but that's going to be the flip, right? And the left, right, the Marxists and the revolutionaries and whatever, they're mad at God, the father, they're mad at their own father, Freud. Tell me about your father, right? I mean, they just don't smile a whole lot. I used to be on a faculty with all liberals. I got along with the liberals. The liberals were fine, right? You could debate. They wanted a big government. I said, be careful, because if you do big government, whoever's in charge of that thing might be your side, might be mine. It didn't resonate. They didn't get it. And so, but now they flipped into this neo-Marxist stuff that's put everybody in a bucket, right? Your race and your gender, and they're just making up the next everything. And so that's what the election's going to be on. And it's going to be on, can someone provide a credible way forward to make people happy again? Wow. Right? Conservatives, for the most part, we had Jerry Falwell Sr. was the founder of Liberty, and Pat Robertson just passed away. And I went on a news show and I said, the interesting thing about those guys, they're always smiling. They love people.
Always.
Jerry was always hanging out with the kids and joking, and the left right now is not that. So they cannot stand the Christian leadership or the Republican
they have
leadership.
absolute disdain for it. I mean, they
Yeah.
think that you're some type of weirdo because
Yeah.
you have a religious side to you and you believe in Jesus
Right.
Christ, or you believe
Right.
whatever your core beliefs are. If there's
Yeah.
any hint of religious thought process in what you believe, you're ostracized from the left. I mean,
Yeah.
they what is this? I mean,
Yeah.
there shouldn't be any
Well,
of this.
Yeah, and the irony related to what you've been saying, what you just got done saying, is the left hasn't quite clicked yet that all the trillionaires are on the left now. All the owners and CEOs and chairman of the boards and board members of all those big tech firms are all bona fide leftists. And I don't mean liberals.
No, they're left.
They're leftists. And they're now the capitalist class. So it's going to be a little ironic for the Marxists to have to explain how the Republicans are leading a grassroots charge against the capitalists. I mean, everything really is upside down, right? I mean, it's quite a turnaround in a short order.
It really is. I mean, you go back
Yeah.
like 8 to 12 years. If you said
Yeah.
this is where we're going to be at this point,
Right.
you'd be scratching your head
No,
saying, no,
right.
it's going to happen. All right, we got a couple minutes left. Trump's up right now in the Republican primary field.
Yeah.
Pick your polling. They're pretty consistent, about
Yeah.
a 30-point lead over DeSantis. And then you
Yeah.
have what I call the next tier of the Tim Scotts, the Nikki Haley's. Mike Pence has made arguably a pretty good impression coming out of the gate. And he's up 6-7 points from, basically from 1 to 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dave, is there a credible alternative to President Trump? I mean, he did that interview, and I haven't seen it yet, folks, but I've seen clips of it. Is there some cracks in Trump's support? Because that base is pretty solid, and the candidates going against him, they're not criticizing him. And if you don't criticize, the king,
Right.
how do you beat the king if you never criticize the king?
Right. Yeah, no, Trump is a phenomenon, and he's unique. And right now, I don't see a threat to that lead. And I can just tell you from my experience as a congressman, right? I had Tea Party support, and I won over, Republican support, running on a Republican creed. And I'd go to Trump events and say, hey to everybody, hey, I'm Dave Brat, I'm the congressman, and they go, who are you? Right. And this is at like a Trump rally.
Right.
So he's got this group that the standard Republicans did not get.
Right.
And he's got this amalgam of variables, right? Like I own 747s and I got skyscrapers and I'm married to Melania and I got gold toilets and I'm a construction guy and the road crews love them. And it doesn't come over to the standard Republican, but the standard Republicans, some of them go to him.
Right.
So he's got this unique thing. And then, he went right now against the FBI, the CIA, and the intelligence community and Justice Department. And now the evidence comes in. 51 of the national security guys signed a document that was not true. And I'm being very polite with that description. And so when he's the juggernaut that faced all that down, it's hard for someone else to make a credible entry if that ends up being the big variable for the election, that this administrative state is out of control. And I think you just saw IRS agent, a housewives breaks in. I mean, not break in, but he goes in and no paperwork ahead of time. And then the police come and the lawyers check in and he's arrogant toward them and nothing happens. And so if these stories start percolating, the average American might finally go, whoa, it's getting a little nervy here.
Well, the one thing that bothers me, again, whether you like Trump, hate Trump, agree, disagree with the charges, I mean, the one thing that bothered me about that whole thing, Dave, and then I'm going to let you close it out here.
Yeah.
They violated attorney-client privilege.
Yeah.
That, to me, first of all, folks, for him to be convicted, it's going to have to be unanimous. If there's one holdout, he's not going to be convicted on these charges. Again, whatever you think of the charges. But I have a problem, Dave, with the process of forcing his attorney. I mean, I thought attorney-client privilege was sacrosanct. I didn't know that. I didn't know you could do that. And frankly, I've had a lot of lawyers say you can't. So, Dave, handicap it a little bit for me. What comes out of these Trump charges? And then assuming it's Trump Biden, now I'm not asking you to predict the winner, but how does this play out through the campaign?
I got no idea. And all these political views are just my own, right? I don't speak on behalf of any group or whatever. But I think you just laid it out. I mean, all you've heard so far is the prosecution's case through the mainstream media.
Right.
Well, you're going to go into discovery, and you get to go into discovery on all the folks from the Justice Department who put forward these charges. I think that's where you're going to find the issues. Mm-hmm. Right. The folks that did this are also the same guy that did injustice to Bob McDonnell here in Virginia.
Yes.
He was a Boy Scout, nice guy. And as somebody said, the mafia guy or somebody said, you want to prosecute, you show me the guy, I'll find the crime. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, hey, guys, this has got to be spontaneous, especially when you got so much problems on the left, going back to Hillary and all this stuff. Everybody knows that you don't got to relitigate it. But yeah, once you go back to discovery, I think they're going to have some problems on their side. And if any part of that case is polluted, the case can't go forward. Right. So stay tuned.
Yep. I'm with you on that. And Dave, parting comment, if Trump is the nominee, he has got to get those independent voters. That's how you're going to win the election. You know this from running before. He can't sit here and lose independents by 30 points. Yep. So whatever you think of him, if he's our nominee, somebody get in that man's head and say, here's how we have to focus on winning. Because, folks, as I've said many times, this is not a national election. There's going to be 8 or 9 states that are going to decide this. And the margin is very slim. So you get a slight shift in independent voters. Dave, we could see some of I got to tell you one thing. We thought 2016 was crazy. And then 2020, when Biden got elected, everybody's basement strategy. I think it's going to be nuts coming up later this year and into 2024. Folks, strap in because it's going to be a crazy season.
Yeah, no, that's right. Right. And hey, I just want to share with your CEOs and C-suite folks out there, Liberty University, we have a CEO summit. Last year, we had about 700 folks. We got Secretary Pompeo coming in again, the former Secretary of Defense coming in, Rand Paul's coming in, a bunch of prominent CEOs. And so if you're a CEO or in the C-suite or, national leadership and you want to see Liberty University, come on in. It's October 10 to 12. Okay. 10 is with the students, and then 12 is all CEO networking more privately. The students go off on break. But we want you to see it all. And so it's just email me, dabrat@liberty.edu. dabrat.
And you've had some international CEOs come in for the event also, haven't you, Dave?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do a huge African push. We got a bunch of Christian friends through sub-Saharan Africa. We've had former presidents in, trade delegation. The entire delegation from DRC Congo came in last year. Several billionaires from Nigeria, Ghana's former president, friends from South Sudan, one of the poorest countries in the world, that they need our capital flows. So I'm trying to engage and find win-win opportunities for U.S. businesses to invest in Africa. Some of the finest people, best Christian people I've ever met. And so just part of our mission at Liberty.
Well, Dave, I want to thank you for not only for the work you're doing at Liberty, but for everything you're doing for the conservative cause. And Dave Brat is a rock-solid conservative, folks. He's fought the fight, and he continues to. Dave, thank you again for coming on and joining me today. It is always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your
love
views.
The show, Mark. Love the show. God bless you. God bless everyone out there.
All right, folks. That's it for today. We'll be back in a couple days. Stay safe. We'll cut through the propaganda, and we'll give it to you straight. Have a good evening.